I'm good, Hunter. Thank you so much for introducing me, and thank you to Power to Fly for having me. It's such a pleasure to be sharing more about my journey as an author and what it means to me to see diversity in representation. So, I'm going to be kicking off with a short presentation about my journey in publishing and how I got started in writing. And I will be sharing my screen.
Fantastic. I'm here if you need me for anything at any time, okay?
Sounds good. Let me know if you're able to see my screen.
Yep, see it. We can see it. It's not in presentation mode yet, but there we go. Perfect.
Okay, perfect. So, yeah, thank you for having me. And I'm going to dive right into my journey of writing a story that I wanted to tell. So, I was born and raised in Singapore. And after high school, I moved to California to attend Stanford University. I graduated a couple of years ago with degrees in communications and psychology. And I used to work in fashion. I was a writer for fashion publications like Vogue, Tatler, and Harper's Bazaar. But these days, life is looking a little different. I now work as a data analyst at a B2B tech company in Silicon Valley, and on the side, I write novels starring women of color in the workplace. I released my first book, The Fraud Squad, last year, which became a Good Morning America buzz pick and a #1 new release in Asian American literature on Kindle. I just released my second book, Valley Verified, and I have another book coming out this fall. And these are just some of the media appearances that Hunter was talking about. Okay, so how I got started in writing goes back all the way to 2020 when I was a junior in my third year at Stanford University. I was a normal college student living in the dorms with my friends. But as I'm sure all of us remember, spring 2020 was also when the world radically changed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Once the pandemic hit my school, it shut down and everyone was going back home to be with their family. And I really wanted to do the same. I wanted to go back home to Singapore to spend the pandemic with my family, but every country was shutting down its borders. So ultimately, I stayed put in California and I spent most of 2020 living alone by myself in a small studio in the Bay. And as a result, I got very homesick. And that summer was also when anti-Asian racism was escalating throughout the country and around the whole world. At that point in time during lockdown, our only sources of contact with the outside world was through the media and social media. But every time I turned on the news, I would see news reports of the people in power, the politicians in power at that time saying really hateful things about the Asian community, about Asians like myself. I would go on Twitter and I would see photos of elderly Asians being the victim of hate crimes. And when I saw photos of their blackened eyes and bruised faces, it was really hard for me to not see my parents and my grandparents in their places. So I was just living in this general climate of fear and depression. I was tired of seeing the Asian community being portrayed in such a negative and derogatory manner. And like I said, I was very homesick, very lonely. And with so much emotions churning within me, I just really needed an outlet. And that's when I got an itch to start putting those feelings into words. And so I started writing a story set in my home country of Singapore. I think of it as a love letter to home, a way of staying connected to home at a time when I didn't know when I would get to be home again. And this is a really quick summary of my writing process, which actually took almost a year, but it's just been condensed into one page. So I started off by scribbling my story on a notebook, and eventually my hand got tired and I was running out of space. So I shifted things over to my laptop. I finished the first draft in 3 months. I remember I finished the first draft 2 days before I started my final year at university. And I spent the next 6 months editing my manuscript, polishing it before I finally realized that it might be ready to show it to someone else. And so I sent it out to a few different literary agencies, hoping that an agent would be interested enough to want to sign me as a client. And just for context, I think for any creative industry, it's really common to get an agent. Models, actors, singers, we all have agents, and so do authors. And an agent is basically the bridge between the writer and the publisher. And subsequently, I ended up selling my book to Penguin Random House, the largest publisher in the United States. I got my book deal around the same time I graduated from university and the day before my 23rd birthday. So it felt like the nice end of one chapter of my life and the start of a new chapter of my life where I could call myself a published author. And so in January 2023 last year, my first book, The Fraud Squad, came out. And then 1 year later, I released my second novel, Barely Verified. These two books are both separate, so you can read them all on their own. And later this year, I'll be releasing my third book, May the Best Player Win. So these three books were the culmination of my writing journey from summer 2020 till now. So it's been almost 3 years. Wait, I think slightly more than that. Okay, I think almost 4 years. And this is my book that just came out. So it is set in Silicon Valley's tech industry. It focuses on Zoe Zhang, a fashion writer who's forced to quit her New York fashion job and move to Silicon Valley to take on a new challenge at a tech startup. And in this cutthroat land of tech bros and tech billionaires, Zoe must battle not just the doubts from others, but also her own insecurities about whether she belongs in this male-dominated industry as a woman of color. And this story is really close to my heart because it is loosely based on my personal experience. So as I mentioned, I used to work in fashion. After I graduated from Stanford in 2021, I worked as a fashion writer at Vogue in Singapore. And a few months into my job, I ended up getting a new opportunity to work for a tech company in Silicon Valley. And at that time, I just figured, why not? This could be an interesting new challenge. So I decided to take the plunge, pack my bags, and move back to the Bay Area in August 2021. And I went from the world of high fashion to the world of high tech. So things look pretty different. But I didn't realize just quite how different it would be until I started my new job in tech. I went from working with mostly women in fashion to suddenly being surrounded by software engineers and data scientists, most of whom were men. In fashion, I was doing creative work in the arts and social sciences, and that was also my academic background. I studied the arts and social sciences, but now I was suddenly plunged into a new field, which is very STEM heavy and data oriented. My job used to be about writing articles, attending photo shoots, going to brand events, and suddenly my job became all about coding. And I had never coded before in my life, so I was learning it on the job. And back in Singapore, when I was working in fashion, in 2021, Singapore was beginning to emerge from the pandemic, so people were really going back to the office to work. And I was also living at home with my family, so I had a strong support system around me. I was seeing people, seeing friends every day. But when I came back to California, people were still mostly working remotely, and I was living alone again. So I suddenly found myself without anyone around me, without anyone to confide in or turn to. And that is when all the self-doubt and the confidence crisis and the insecurities crept in. I began to wonder to myself if I had made the right decision in taking on this new job and flying across the world to try something so radically different from what I was used to. I felt like an utter failure where I wasn't learning fast enough, I kept making mistakes, but it seemed like everyone around me knew what they were doing, which just made me feel even worse in comparison. And the thing is, I didn't dare to tell anyone about how I felt. I didn't want my parents to worry about me, so every time they called me, I would only tell them the good things about how well work was going, but I was just lying to them. And I couldn't bring myself to tell my friends because my friends all seemed so successful and accomplished. And I just didn't want to admit to them that I wasn't the same way. I was still trying to present this facade of success when deep down I felt like I had failed. And as I did the first time around during the pandemic, I took off these churning emotions within me and started writing a new book, which later became Value Verified. And then in January 2024, my book came out. It's being sold worldwide in bookstores, libraries, online. You can get it from pretty much anywhere. And I was fortunate enough that some amazing authors and organizations have read Value Verified and had very nice things to say. For instance, American Library Association said that my book is brimming with necessary discussion on sexism and gender bias in the tech industry, with a character that many readers will relate to. But what personally meant most to me was having readers reach out to me. I've had men and women from all ages and different stages of their career reach out to me to tell me that they could relate to what my main character was going through. It's people at the start of their careers, like me, people in management, high-ranking executives, people who are already retired, and they all told me that they had at one point or another experienced what my main character went through, that they had also suffered imposter syndrome, self-doubt, low self-esteem. And I'm just going to end off with a few takeaways from my journey so far that I think are applicable to both writing and to making a career change. So firstly, a question that I wish I had asked myself at the beginning is, what would you do if you know you couldn't fail? So for me, when I made my career change, I think my mindset was just that this was something so new to me. I wasn't qualified. And so from the very beginning, it was almost like I was sabotaging myself because I just didn't believe that I could do it. But I wish I had applied the same mindset that to my career change as I did to writing. So during the pandemic, it was the first time I was living alone. And it was the first time when I felt like I didn't have to care about what anyone else thought about what I was doing. If I was still back in school, I wouldn't have even tried to write a book because I would be too afraid that what if I failed? What would the people around me think? What would my friends think? But when I was living alone, I dared to start doing something new. I dared to start writing a book because even if I failed, it's okay because no one even has to know I'm writing a book. So similarly, I wish that I could have gone back in time and told myself when I started this new job that, you know, if you could just know that you wouldn't fail, you would plunge into it with so much more belief and determination. Secondly, would be to take ownership. So at the start of my new job, I was almost afraid of trying my best because my mindset was, what if I tried my best and I still wasn't good enough? What does that say about my competence or about my abilities? But in hindsight, I realized that it didn't matter what I thought about it. All it mattered was how it looked to other people. No one has to know how hard I'm trying, but they would know if I'm not producing the desired results. And so either ways, I'm just gonna have to try my best. And at least if I tried my best and it still didn't work out, I would know that I had done all that I could and I would have no regrets. And similarly for writing, even though I have an amazing publishing team, it takes a whole village to put out a book. But at the end of the day, it is my name on the book cover. So there's a lot more accountability, and I really have to take ownership of the results of the work that I'm producing. And lastly, and what I think is most important, comparison is the thief of joy. In my job, I found myself always comparing myself to the others around me. I was asking myself, why aren't you learning as quickly as your coworker? Why don't you know as much as your teammate? And similarly in writing, you could play the comparison game all day long. You could ask yourself, why did my friend get an agent before I did? Why did my friend sell her book before I did? Why did my friend hit the bestseller list and I didn't? But all the questions will do is to make you miserable and depressed. So these days, I tell myself to block out everything that I cannot control, like awards, accolades, bestseller lists, sales numbers, because I can't do anything about them, I don't even think about them. Instead, what I do focus on are the things within my control, such as the amount of time and effort I put into writing. What can I do to personally improve the quality of the work that I'm putting out? And I can just talk very briefly about my other two books. So my first book, The Fraud Squad, like I said, is set in my home country of Singapore. It's about an ordinary working class woman who pretends to be a socialite and infiltrates high society to get her dream job. But as she sinks deeper into this new world, she begins to learn not all that glitters is gold. Everyone is hiding a secret, and someone is out to expose her secret. And my book coming out in a few months, May the Best Player Win. It's suitable for preteens, teenagers, and adults as well, so parents and kids can read it together. It stars a young chess player who makes a bet with her sexist rival that girls can be as good as guys at the game. But as she sets out to prove him wrong and to win their bet, the weight of expectations causes performance anxiety to creep in, threatening not just her performance on the board, but also her love for chess. And so she has to ask herself, can you play for fun if you're playing to win? You can get all my books at my website, kylazhao.com, and I also have a newsletter. And you can also get in touch with me on Instagram or through my email. So yeah, that ends off my little presentation. Thanks for following along. And now I believe we're going to be moving on to some questions. Is that right, Hunter?
Yeah, that's right. Wow. Thank you so much for that presentation. It's so inspiring.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. You have what, 5 books now?
3 books.
3 books.
Yes.
Okay. But still, that's absolutely incredible. 3 books. Do you just write every single day? Like, what is your process like for writing?
Yeah, so I have learned, over the years through trial and error, what is the time of the day that works best for me creatively? And that would be mornings. And on weekday mornings, I do have a full-time job in tech, so I can't really be working on my books then. And
Mm.
as a result, my weekend mornings are completely dedicated to writing. I guard this pocket of time very strictly, so that means saying no to hanging out with people, and instead just buckling down and focus on writing my books.
I completely identify and relate to that. Mornings is when I feel less inhibited
Yeah,
to just let my thoughts flow because
yeah,
the day goes on and then I'm just thinking about all the things I should be doing, right?
yeah, absolutely. And also my motivation is highest in the morning. I'm
Hmm.
like, yeah, like no, I love to write. I want to write. But
Yeah.
after a long day when you're just mentally exhausted, the last thing you want to do is sit down in front of a computer and then have to create something from imagination.
Yeah, absolutely. Or like after lunch, I just want a nap. I don't want to write.
Yeah, no, I totally get that.
So I love how you've really just had this huge transformation over the past. I mean, it's kind of perfect segue. The last talk we were talking about chrysalis, right? Of this metamorphosis from one thing into another. And you had this incubator period of lockdown, the pandemic. Thank you for sharing about anxiety and depression and loneliness. Those are very vulnerable things to share with us. And thank you for that. And how you got through it with this self-discovery, and it really gave you time to examine these things. You spoke of imposter syndrome and the yeah, at the end when you're comparing yourselves to other people. That
Yeah.
reminded me of a rhyme. There's compare and despair, right? We just
I
like,
never heard of that, but that is so right.
right? I didn't
Yeah.
coin it. Like, it's an old one, but compare and despair. I was like, oof, I know that one all too well.
Hmm.
When it does it still come up for you? Because you say like there's things that are out of our control, right? And it's our the best we can do is accept that, right? That
Yeah.
there's things out of our control. But some days accepting it maybe just not be working. Do you still have the things come up, and how do you process it in real time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think the journey to being confident, it's honestly not a linear progress. There are some days, like you said, when you do feel, when you do realize that, having these thoughts, having this comparison, like it doesn't serve you, so you block it out. But there are some days when the thoughts are just ringing too loudly in your head, and it's just kind of like filling up your mind and it's distracting you. So I think, I wouldn't say that I've gotten more confident necessarily. I think I've gotten more self-aware about when these unconfident thoughts do happen. I realize that they don't really serve any good purpose in my life and that I can be aware of them.
Mm,
Like you said, I think they are part and parcel of life. Everyone is going to experience insecurities and imposter syndrome at one point or another. Like some of the most accomplished people that I know, they still tell me that they feel it. It never leaves you. You
hmm.
just become more aware of it and more accepting that this is just a normal part of life and that you don't have to beat yourself up over it.
Right. That's the thing, right? Is we can be so hard on ourselves, and that just gets us further and further away from the thing that we actually want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think the acceptance for me is about I'm not responsible for my first thought, but I am
Mm.
responsible for my second and then my actions.
Yes. Yes, that's a really
Yeah.
good way of putting it.
Mm. So you have oh, great. We're getting questions from the chat too. Please keep those coming. I'll definitely jump into that next. So you've been honored by the California State Assembly for your contributions as an advocate for Asian media representation. So can you elaborate on the significance of diverse storytelling in today's cultural landscape, and how do you see the role of authors evolving in championing inclusivity and social change?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking that because this is a topic that's really close to my heart. And I could honestly talk about it all day. So it was kind of how I got started in writing, this desire to see more positive media representation for the Asian community. Like I said, during the pandemic, all I saw was Asians being portrayed as the perpetrators of COVID, as the perpetrators of a crime. And I just got so sick of seeing my fellow Asians be depicted in a really negative and derogatory manner. I wanted to see people like myself, people who look like me, people whom I could relate to, be the stars of something joyful and vibrant and uplifting. That is the Asian community that I know. And because I couldn't see it in the media or on social media, I decided to start creating my own story where Asian characters would be the main characters, they wouldn't be the sidekicks, they would be the stars
Mm,
of their own story. So that's how I got started in writing, and all my books would always star Asian characters. That is a non-negotiable for me. And to me, I think representation is both quantity and quality. So I can also tie this back to the tech industry, for instance, where I work full time. In the tech industry in Silicon Valley, we are not short of Asians. Asians are not in a minority, but it is also the quality of representation that matters. We see a lot of Asians at the entry levels, or even just above that. But as you go up the ranks into management, into executive leadership, you're going to see fewer and fewer Asians. And that's actually a concept called the bamboo ceiling, where it almost seems like there's a limit to how far we can go. And some of it goes back to existing prevailing notions about what Asians are like we're too quiet, we're not assertive enough, we're too submissive, we don't have the leadership skills or what it takes to be a leader.
mm,
And that kind of representation is so harmful to us, to helping us advance. And similarly in writing, I mean, growing up, some of the most formative Asian American books with Asian characters would be The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan, for instance, and great book. But I felt like for a while there was this idea that the only kind of Asian stories that could be told are those that are immigrant stories, those that focus on intergenerational and family trauma. And I mean, to sum up, they were kind of sad stories. And those stories are important, but sometimes, the world is serious enough already. I don't want to read something serious. I want to read
mm.
like a fun book. And so that's why I wanted to write a story that was fun, but still centered Asians as the main characters. And hopefully, we're going to see a lot more diversity in the kind of stories that can be told about our community, that can be told about characters of color. We don't have to be shoehorned into, oh, we can own our story is only valid if it's painful and sad and focus on immigrants. Like, no, because our lives are so varied and so colorful, and we deserve to have that be conveyed in the kind of stories written about us. That was
Yes.
such a long, rambly answer, but yeah, I can tell this is something I feel very passionate about.
Oh, it was not rambly to me. That was clear, concise, and inspiring. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I completely understand. I can identify with what you're saying as far as like being a queer person. There's so much being like they're the funny sidekick, or like, or it's a story about HIV AIDS. Like both of
Yeah,
these things, like HIV and the epidemic is very important to talk about. But it was
yeah.
also like this is where gay culture fits in mass culture.
Exactly. It's we're
And
being pigeonholed into a
yeah,
specific stereotype, but no, we're like so much more than that.
yeah, we have so much more to share. And it's like, I love too. You're like, the world is intense enough. I want to have something fun that people can engage in, and also is centered on a character that is, part of your culture, your identity. And like we saw in your slides, so many people identify. They're like, someone said, did you write this book for me? Like that's what it felt like for a lot of
Yeah.
people. Yeah. Do you feel a responsibility to be for accurate portrayals of different cultural backgrounds and being respectful and accurate, while also how do you balance allowing room for creative interpretation when you're doing these stories for your books?
Yeah, I mean, the Asian diaspora is so broad that I would never presume my book could cover like all of the potential cultures and communities within the Asian diaspora. The most I could do is to represent my own culture that I come from as accurately and respectfully as possible. But I definitely encourage all readers to check out as many books by Asian authors as possible, to expose yourself to a wide spectrum of the potential cultures that exist within this diaspora, because we are not a monolith and we shouldn't be, classified under one broad umbrella.
Yes. So we only have 2 minutes left, Kyla. We have your slide up here of all the great ways to stay connected to you. Is there anything before we wrap up today that we haven't touched on that you would want to make sure everyone knows about or hears about or is
If
left?
was there a question in the chat that
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you. You're on it. Someone asked, and I'm also curious about this. You touched on it, but in our last few minutes, how were you able to transition successfully from fashion to tech? Because those are wildly different industries.
they are wildly different? And I think the number one thing would be not to be afraid of asking for help, to let down your
Mhm.
ego. In the beginning, I was afraid of asking for help. I didn't know how that would appear to others. Like, are they going to think that I'm weak, that I'm not good enough because I have to, like be asking questions all the time. I have to be reaching out to people. But once I realized that the only person whom I'm harming by doing that is myself, I learned to open up more. I learned to be honest enough to tell my manager, to tell my teammates, hey, this is something that I don't know, but I'm going to do everything I can to get caught up to speed. Can you tell me what resources might be helpful? And yeah, I think that was the first step. Actually, no, the first step is acknowledging that this is something that is an issue. I think for the longest time, I'm not good at facing up to negative emotions. My
Mhm.
tendency is to just ignore them or suppress them and hope they magically disappear on their own. But when I was writing the story of Value Verified, when I was crafting this book of fiction, this
Mm,
story gave me a safe space to explore my own insecurities and to come to terms with them. And once I could acknowledge them, that was actually the first step to asking myself, okay, well, you're in a situation that makes you unhappy, that makes you feel unconfident, what can you do about it? So I think acknowledging that was the first step.
and having this, like you said, this safe space that you gifted yourself to explore this and then share it with so many other people that can identify with it and help them on their journey.
Yeah, I do hope that anyone who reads this book would feel less alone and would realize that, change is scary and uncomfortable, and those feelings are really valid. Yeah, so hopefully my book just serves to help people feel less alone and to feel a little bit more seen.
Mm. Thank you, Kyla. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you for making the time. Congratulations on everything you've been up to and your
Yeah.
future book. I wish you the best. I hope we get to have you back. Please come back.
Thank you so much, Hunter, for hosting me. And yeah, I hope everyone else really enjoys the summit. It's going so well.
Well, thank you, Kyla. Have a great rest of your day.
You too.
All right,
Bye.
bye.